Flight 782 cut smoothly through the bright blue sky, its silver wings glinting in the sunlight as it soared high above the clouds. At 30,000 feet, the world below was invisible, just a soft white sea of cotton, calm and endless. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was peaceful. A soft hum of the engines filled the air, blending with the muffled chatter of passengers and the occasional clink of a coffee cup. The flight had taken off from Denver just over an hour ago, bound for New York. It was an ordinary afternoon flight, business travelers typing away on laptops, families heading for vacations, and a few sleepy faces resting against window panes. The scent of brewed coffee and reheated meals floated faintly through the air. In the cockpit, Captain Reynolds, a veteran pilot with over 20 years of experience, sat confidently at the controls. His co-pilot, a young officer named Harris, beside him. "Smooth skies today," Reynolds said with a smile, tapping the control panel gently. "Perfect day to fly." Harris nodded, checking the flight readings. "Everything looks good. Winds are calm, and we're right on schedule." Back in the cabin, the passengers were unaware that anything could ever go wrong. A little girl by the window giggled as she watched the clouds drift below like floating mountains. An elderly couple beside her shared a blanket, whispering softly. A businessman in the front row adjusted his tie and scrolled through emails, already preparing for a meeting waiting in Manhattan. And then, it happened. A faint metallic sound echoed from somewhere deep within the plane. A sound subtle enough that most passengers didn't notice. But those closest to the cockpit felt a slight shudder run through the floor like distant thunder. A few seconds later, the captain's calm voice stopped mid-sentence as he leaned forward suddenly, his hand gripping the throttle. "Captain?" Harris asked, his tone uncertain. Reynolds didn't respond. His head slumped to one side, his breathing irregular. His eyes fluttered open for a moment, then closed again as his body went limp. "Captain!" Harris's voice cracked. He reached over, shaking the older man's shoulder. No response. The readings on the instruments began to flicker slightly as the plane tilted a few degrees off course. Panic rose in Harris's chest. He switched on the autopilot, trying to steady both the aircraft and his nerves. He grabbed the radio. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Flight 782. Our captain is unresponsive. Repeat, captain unresponsive." The air traffic controller's voice came back immediately, calm but firm. "Copy that. Flight 782. Maintain current altitude." "Confirm. Is co-pilot in control?" Harris swallowed hard. "Affirmative. I am in control. For now." He turned to the cabin intercom, his hands trembling slightly. He took a breath, trying to sound composed, but his voice wavered. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "this is your co-pilot speaking. We're experiencing a medical emergency with our captain. If there's anyone on board with medical experience, please make yourself known to the cabin crew immediately." The words rippled through the aircraft like a shockwave. For a moment, there was silence, just the hum of the engines and the faint rustle of passengers turning to one another. Then came the gasps. Someone dropped a cup of coffee, the hot liquid spilling across the floor. A woman clutched her husband's arm. The flight attendants froze for a second before springing into action. "Medical emergency in the cockpit," one of them shouted as she rushed forward, her shoes clicking rapidly against the aisle floor. Two others followed, grabbing the first aid kit and oxygen tank. Rows of faces turned toward the front of the plane. Fear spread like wildfire. Even those who had been half asleep were now wide awake, eyes darting anxiously toward the cockpit door. A baby started crying in the back, setting off a chain of nervous murmurs. Near seat 14A, a man in a gray jacket lowered his newspaper and looked quietly toward the front. His face was calm, unreadable, but his eyes sharpened as he heard the words echo again over the speakers. "Captain unresponsive." In the cockpit, the situation worsened. The flight attendant leaned over the unconscious pilot, pressing two fingers to his neck. "I can't find a pulse. Wait, no, it's weak," she cried. The co-pilot's hands gripped the yoke tightly as turbulence began to rock the plane. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "Stay with me, Captain," he muttered under his breath. "Sir, should we divert?" the attendant asked. "Yes, I'm preparing to. But I need—" Harris stopped mid-sentence as the plane shuddered again, the nose dipping slightly before autopilot corrected it. He turned back to the intercom. "Cabin crew, Secure the passengers and prepare for possible turbulence. Medical assistance to the cockpit immediately. In the cabin, fear was now palpable. Some passengers whispered prayers. Others clutched armrests or fumbled for their phones, though there was no signal this high up. The man in 14A continued watching, still calm, still silent. The light above his seat flickered briefly from the turbulence, casting a shadow over his face. He seemed to be thinking, calculating. A young doctor sitting a few rows behind hurried to the front, guided by a flight attendant. "I'm a cardiologist," she said. "Let me through." She entered the cockpit and knelt beside the captain, beginning chest compressions. The rhythmic thud of her palms against his chest echoed faintly into the cabin. The minutes dragged on like hours. The once calm passengers were now caught in a storm of uncertainty. Every small noise, the beep of a system alert, the creak of the overhead bins felt amplified. Outside, the sky remained beautiful and blue, as if mocking the chaos inside. And through it all, the man in 14A simply watched, eyes focused, posture unshaken. No one noticed how his right hand rested lightly on the armrest, fingers tapping in a slow, practiced rhythm. Like someone counting down to something, he knew what was coming. The calm was over. The real test at 30,000 feet had just begun. The plane was no longer calm. Tension hung heavy in the air, pressing down on every passenger like the weight of the sky itself. The intercom had gone silent after the co-pilot's plea for medical help. A few passengers sobbed quietly, while others stared at the cockpit door as if willing it to open and deliver good news. But the news wasn't good. Not yet. Inside the cockpit, the young co-pilot, Harris, was fighting to stay composed. The captain lay slumped in his seat, his chest rising weakly as the onboard doctor continued compressions. Harris's hands were slick with sweat as he adjusted the flight controls. His mind raced, altitude steady, engines stable, but his heart was pounding like a drum. And then, from the back of the first-class cabin, a quiet voice broke the panic. "I'm not a doctor." Heads turned. A man in his mid-40s, tall, calm and quietly confident, was unbuckling his seatbelt in seat 14A. He had said barely a word since boarding. Most passengers hadn't noticed him at all. He wore a simple navy jacket, jeans, and a pair of dark sunglasses that concealed sharp, watchful eyes. The nearest flight attendant stepped forward, trying to stop him. "Sir, please remain seated," she said quickly. "We have a medical emergency." "I heard," the man interrupted, his tone calm but firm. "And I can help, not with the captain's condition." He paused. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. "But with flying the plane." The words hit like a thunderclap. For a few seconds, no one said a thing. Passengers exchanged bewildered looks. Someone even laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. But the man didn't smile. He moved, with quiet purpose, toward the cockpit, brushing past the flight attendant as he reached into his jacket pocket. The co-pilot glanced up as the door opened. His eyes were bloodshot with stress. "Sir, you can't be in here," he barked. "Please return to your seat." But the man held up a small, worn leather wallet and flipped it open. Inside was a faded ID card, the corners frayed with age. The name was printed clearly: Captain Ryan Cross, U.S. Air Force, retired. Below the name was an emblem, a pair of silver wings and a call sign stamped in faded ink. Falcon. Harris froze. You're military?" "Was," Ryan corrected softly, stepping into the cramped cockpit. "Flew for 20 years. F-16s, rescue transports, some commercial simulations after retirement." His eyes flicked over the control panel instinctively, checking altitude, speed, fuel flow, weather radar. He nodded slightly. "You're steady, but you've got a side wind creeping in. Trim's off by 2 degrees. Harris blinked, momentarily stunned. "You noticed that from the door?" Ryan didn't answer. He leaned over the unconscious captain, checking for signs of life. "How long has he been out?" 10 minutes, maybe more. Doctor's trying to revive him. Pulse is faint. Ryan's jaw tightened. Then we can't count on him taking control anytime soon. The young co-pilot hesitated. He looked exhausted, scared, but also reluctant. "Sir, with all due respect, this is a Boeing 737. It's not a fighter jet." Ryan gave a faint, knowing smile. "You're right. A 737 doesn't roll at max speed. But it still listens to the same principles. Airspeed, attitude, altitude. Once you understand the language of the sky, every aircraft speaks it." For a moment, neither man moved. The hum of the engines was the only sound between them. Then finally Harris nodded. "Fine. Take the right seat." Ryan sat down slowly, his hands settling on the controls like they belonged there. His movements were precise, practiced, not hurried but confident. The years hadn't dulled his instincts. They'd sharpened them. From the cabin, passengers whispered in confusion. "Who is he?" someone asked. "Is he really a pilot?" another murmured. A few craned their necks to see into the cockpit, catching only glimpses of Ryan's broad shoulders and calm demeanor. The flight attendant returned to the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We have a volunteer assisting our co-pilot." Her voice trembled slightly, but she tried to sound reassuring. Back in the cockpit, Ryan adjusted the headset around his neck and radioed the tower. "This is Flight 782, requesting immediate priority for landing. Pilot incapacitated. Co-pilot and additional qualified personnel now in control." The voice from the tower came back, cautious but professional. "Copy that, Flight 782. Please identify additional personnel." Ryan hesitated for half a second, then replied, "Name's Ryan Cross, former Air Force captain, call sign, Falcon." There was silence on the other end. Then a different, deeper voice took over the frequency, the kind that carried respect. "Captain Cross? Falcon? Is that really you?" Ryan smirked faintly. "Last I checked." In the control tower, murmurs erupted. The name wasn't forgotten. Years ago, Falcon had been a legend, a pilot who once landed a burning aircraft during a storm, saving an entire crew. His disappearance after a classified rescue mission had become a mystery among pilots. Some said he'd died. Others said he'd walked away from the skies for good. Now somehow, he was here, sitting in the cockpit of a commercial flight at 30,000 feet, steadying a plane that could have easily become a tragedy. The co-pilot glanced at him with a mix of awe and disbelief. "You really are Falcon?" Ryan kept his eyes on the horizon, hands steady on the yoke. "Let's just get these people home, Lieutenant." Outside, the clouds began to darken ahead, a storm forming on the radar. Turbulence flickered through the instruments. The plane shook lightly, warning of what was to come. Ryan's voice was calm as ever. "Looks like it's going to be a rough ride." For the first time since the chaos began, the co-pilot managed a small smile. "You think we'll make it?" Ryan adjusted the trim and looked out at the endless expanse of sky. "We don't think, son," he said quietly. "We fly." And with that, the man who had been just another passenger minutes ago, the silent one in seat 14A, became the only hope for Flight 782. Ryan slid into the pilot's seat as if it had always been his. The leather creaked faintly beneath him, the faint glow of control lights reflecting in his sharp, steady eyes. His movements were fluid, instinctive, the kind of grace that only comes from thousands of hours in the air. Every switch, every lever, every flicker on the console was familiar to him, like reading an old friend's face after years apart. Beside him, the young co-pilot, Harris, stared in disbelief. His own hands were trembling slightly on the yoke as he tried to comprehend what was happening. Just 10 minutes ago, he was convinced they might not make it through this. And now this stranger, this quiet passenger from seat 14A, was sitting in the captain's chair like he belonged there. You used to fly?" Harris finally managed to stammer out. Ryan gave a small, knowing smile without taking his eyes off the instruments. "Used to," he said. His voice carried a quiet authority, the kind that instantly steadied the air around him. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "Call sign, Falcon." The name seemed to hang in the air for a moment, short, sharp, and heavy with something unspoken. The hum of the engines filled the silence that followed. The co-pilot frowned, trying to place where he had heard it before. Then his eyes widened. "Wait, Falcon? As in the Falcon?" Ryan's only response was a faint smirk as he adjusted the heading and reached for the radio. "Let's tell Control we're not dead yet." He pressed the comm button, his voice cutting clean through the static. "ATC, this is Flight 782. We've stabilized at 30,000 feet. Captain remains unresponsive. This is former Air Force Captain Ryan Cross. Call sign Falcon, assisting in command." There was silence on the other end, then the faint sound of confused chatter in the background. A second later, a different voice, older and steadier, came on the frequency. "Say again, Flight 782, did you say Falcon?" Ryan exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on the horizon. Affirmative. For a few seconds, there was nothing but the hum of static. Then suddenly, the control tower erupted in disbelief. "Falcon? As in the rescue pilot? The one from the Arctic mission?" Another voice cut in, unable to contain itself. "We thought," Ryan interrupted quietly. "Rumors of my death were exaggerated." On the ground, in the control room of the New York Air Traffic Center, jaws dropped. Every senior controller in the room had heard the stories. The legend of the Air Force pilot who had vanished after a classified rescue operation 6 years ago. The mission had been shrouded in mystery, the official report sealed. But everyone knew the whispers: a storm, a damaged aircraft, and a pilot who risked his life to save others. Falcon had disappeared that night. His plane never officially recovered. And now, out of nowhere, his voice was back on the airwaves, calm, steady, and unmistakably alive. The ATC supervisor leaned forward, gripping his headset. "Captain Cross, it's an honor, sir. We'll prioritize your descent route immediately. Weather's deteriorating ahead, so you'll need to navigate through a developing front." "Copy that," Ryan replied evenly, scanning the radar. The storm was forming fast, a mass of dark clouds ahead, dense with lightning. He could feel the turbulence starting to build, subtle but growing. "I see it. We'll keep altitude until we're clear." The co-pilot was still watching him, almost forgetting his own fear as he observed Ryan work. "Sir, how long has it been since you last flew?" Ryan didn't answer right away. He adjusted the rudder trim, correcting a slight drift. His eyes softened for a moment. "Too long," he murmured. Then, after a beat, he added, "But the sky doesn't forget you." Harris swallowed hard, nodding. He'd read about pilots like this, legends whose instincts were almost supernatural, whose calm under pressure saved lives. But sitting next to one was something else entirely. In the cabin, the passengers were still anxious. The announcement had gone out that an experienced former pilot was assisting, but most didn't know who he was. Whispers rippled down the aisles. Theories, guesses, prayers. "Who's flying the plane now?" "They said someone named Ryan Cross." "Wait, I've heard that name before. Isn't he—" A young man near the window pulled up his phone, scrolling through old news articles he'd saved offline. His eyes widened as he found it. "Air Force hero Captain Ryan Falcon Cross presumed dead after Arctic mission." He turned the screen to the others. Murmurs of awe and disbelief spread like wildfire. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Ryan's focus never wavered. The storm was getting closer now, the clouds forming a dark wall ahead. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the edges of his face. Harris's voice was tight. "We could divert south, avoid the storm front." Ryan shook his head. "Too far. We've got a sick captain, low medical support, and one doctor on board who's fighting time. We go through." "But," Ryan turned to him, his eyes steady. "Son, sometimes the safest path isn't around the storm. It's through it." His words were calm, but they carried a weight that silenced any argument. On the ground, the tower relayed updates. "Flight 782, emergency crews are on standby. You're cleared for priority descent when ready," Ryan acknowledged, then glanced at the unconscious captain beside him. For a moment, something unreadable crossed his face. Guilt, maybe, or memory. "You hold on, old man," he muttered softly. "We're bringing you home." The co-pilot looked at him curiously. "You knew him?" Ryan's jaw tightened. "We flew together once. A long time ago." The realization hit Harris. This wasn't just fate. There was history here. Ryan hadn't just ended up on this flight by chance. Outside, the storm was close now. Lightning flickered like camera flashes, the sky alive with sound and fury. Yet inside the cockpit, Ryan Cross was calm, hands steady, voice low but sure. The legend of Falcon had returned. Not as a ghost, not as a story, but as a man, alive and flying again at 30,000 feet. Steering Flight 782 straight into the heart of the storm. And somewhere deep inside him, beneath the discipline and the calm, he could feel it again. The thing he thought he'd lost forever. The sky calling him home. The storm had turned the sky into a furious sea of gray. Wind howled against the fuselage of Flight 782, rattling every bolt and window. Lightning flashed across the horizon, so bright it momentarily turned the cabin white. The passengers held their breath with every flash, clutching armrests in each other's hands as if the very sky were trying to tear them away from the earth. In the cockpit, Ryan Cross, Falcon, sat steady as a rock, with one hand gripping the yoke. He guided the aircraft's nose slightly downward, feeling every vibration through his fingertips. His other hand rested gently on the trembling shoulder of the young co-pilot Harris, whose eyes were wide with fear. The instruments flickered as turbulence jolted the plane. "Hold her steady," Ryan said quietly. "Trust the wings. They'll do their job if we do ours." Harris nodded, swallowing hard. "We're descending through 20,000 feet. Airspeed's high. Ease the throttle. Let gravity do the work." Ryan's voice was calm, almost serene. The voice of a man who had danced with death in the sky before and come back every time. Outside, the storm roared, but Ryan's focus narrowed to the horizon, the thin line between darkness and light. He guided the plane through the turbulence like a sailor steering through crashing waves. Down in the cabin, the tension was unbearable. A child cried softly into her mother's arms. An old couple whispered prayers. The doctor who had treated the unconscious captain was now strapped into a jump seat, white-knuckled, whispering, "Come on, come on." A streak of lightning cracked across the sky, lighting up Ryan's face for a heartbeat. Sharp features, eyes like iron. To Harris, it felt like flying beside a storm god. Altitude 15,000. "Crosswinds 30 knots, Harris called out. Ryan nodded. "We'll ride it out." "Bring flaps to 15. The engines groaned as the plane descended into thicker air. The sound of rain hammering against the windshield was deafening. Harris's hands shook on the throttle, but Ryan stayed firm, guiding him with a steady rhythm. "You've got this," Ryan murmured. "Just breathe. The plane will follow your calm, not your fear." Harris exhaled and steadied himself, repeating the mantra in his head. For the first time since the captain had collapsed, he believed they might actually make it. On the ground, emergency crews were already lined up along the runway. Red and blue lights flashed through the rain. The control tower was alive with tension. "Flight 782, you are cleared for emergency landing on runway 17. Winds gusting from the west at 40 knots. You're cleared to bring her home." Ryan's voice came through the radio, even, grounded, unshaken. "Copy that, tower. Flight 782 commencing emergency descent. Tell those boys to keep the lights bright. I'm coming in low." "Roger that, Falcon," the tower replied. And in that moment, every controller, every firefighter, every medic on the tarmac realized who was flying that plane. The name Falcon, the legend who once landed a crippled jet in a blizzard, had returned. Inside the cockpit, Ryan and Harris exchanged a final nod. "Gear down," Ryan ordered. The landing gear lowered with a mechanical groan cutting through the roar of rain. Flaps full. "Watch your descent rate." "Easy, easy." The runway lights shimmered faintly through the sheets of rain. The plane was still rocking violently, wind slamming against its wings like invisible fists. Harris's voice was hoarse. "We're coming in too hot." "Trust me," Ryan said, eyes locked on the runway. "Not too hot. Just alive." At 1,000 feet, the plane dipped, the nose slightly too low. Harris gasped. "We're sinking!" Ryan countered smoothly, pulling back on the yoke, adjusting the throttle by instinct. The engines roared as the aircraft leveled out just in time. The runway lights were now a glowing path beneath them, 500 feet. "Hold it! Hold it!" Time seemed to slow. The passengers braced. Hearts pounded. The engines howled, and then touchdown. The wheels kissed the runway so gently it felt impossible. A perfect landing. The storm still raged outside, but inside the cabin there was a stunned silence. Disbelief that they were on solid ground, alive. Then the silence broke into thunderous cheers. Applause, laughter, sobs. Some hugged strangers. Others just cried into their hands. Ryan exhaled, finally releasing the yoke. His hands trembled just a little as the tension left him. Harris turned to him, wide-eyed. That was perfect, Ryan smiled faintly. No such thing as perfect landings, kid. Just survivable ones. The paramedics rushed aboard minutes later, taking the unconscious captain into their care. The passengers were escorted down the steps one by one, greeted by flashing lights and cameras. News of the miraculous landing spread instantly, across radios, across the internet, across every screen in the airport. When Ryan finally stepped out of the cockpit, a wave of reporters and airline officials waited, umbrellas shaking in the rain. Cameras flashed in his face as people shouted questions. Sir, who are you? Is it true you're Captain Cross and the Falcon? How did you manage that landing in this weather? Ryan adjusted his jacket and simply smiled, the rain dripping from his hair. His eyes were calm, almost distant. Once a pilot, he said softly. Always a pilot. And with that, he turned away. The crowd tried to follow, but he moved quickly, slipping past the chaos through the terminal and into the sea of people beyond the flashing lights.
By the time the reporters realized he was gone,
the legend had vanished again. No interviews, no photographs, just the memory of a calm voice and a steady hand that had saved them all. Later that night, as news anchors told the story of Flight 782's miracle landing, they spoke his name with reverence. Captain Ryan Falcon Cross, the lost hero of the skies. But those who had been on the flight remembered something deeper, not just the miracle, but the man's quiet strength, the way he made them believe in calm amid chaos. And somewhere, far away from the noise and headlines, Ryan Cross stood on a quiet airfield, watching another jet disappear into the night sky. He smiled faintly, feeling the pull of the horizon again. He didn't need applause. He didn't need credit. He just needed the sky.